On August 7, 1998, 36-year-old Carolyn Durrell didn't show up for work at Northwest Securities in Bellevue, Washington. For a woman who had never once missed a day without calling, who had just received a substantial bonus, who was known as the most reliable person in the office, this was completely out of character. Her co-workers kept checking the door, expecting her to rush in with an apologetic smile and some reasonable explanation. But the hours ticked by. The phone on her desk kept ringing, unanswered. And that's when they knew something was terribly, horribly wrong. When they finally got through to her husband, Bob, his response seemed off. He said she'd left for work that morning, same as always. But here's the thing. Carolyn's red minivan was missing too. Her jewelry was still at home. Her clothes were still in the closet. And the front door? It was unlocked, which was strange for a family with 3 young children. Everything about this disappearance felt wrong from the very beginning. Bob Durrell sat in his living room that evening, a Sunday school teacher and church deacon, the director of the King County Housing Authority's computer division. A man who seemed to have it all together. He told police his wife had simply gone downstairs that morning and never came back up, just vanished into thin air. Maybe, he suggested with unsettling calmness, she'd run away with someone she met on the internet. She'd been having an affair, he explained. Too calmly, some would later say. And at first, the police had to consider that possibility, because Bob had discovered something on Carolyn's computer, chat room conversations with a man named Kevin Johnson. Passionate messages about running away together. Plans to start fresh in Costa Rica where life would be cheaper, simpler, where they could escape their complicated lives and be together. Think about that for a second. Here's a husband, apparently devastated by his missing wife. But he's already done the detective work. He's already found the affair. He's already searched through her computer. He's already built the complete narrative of a woman who abandoned her family for a lover. But then things started getting weird. Carolyn's red minivan was spotted the next day, weaving dangerously through Seattle traffic. The witness described driving that was aggressive, erratic, completely unlike Carolyn's careful, responsible nature. Then came another sighting that gave everyone hope. A convenience store clerk claimed to have seen her the following day, buying gas with cash. Maybe she was alive. Maybe she really had run away. Maybe Bob's story was true. Except when police found the van abandoned at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport a few days later, something didn't add up. There were no foreign fingerprints inside, no signs of struggle, no evidence that anyone but Carolyn had been in that vehicle. And here's what made investigators' eyes narrow. Her bank account sat completely untouched. That bonus she'd just deposited, still there, growing stale, waiting for someone who would never withdraw it. What kind of person plans to start a new life in Costa Rica but leaves thousands of dollars behind? What kind of person runs away to freedom but doesn't take the one thing they'd need to survive? Kevin Johnson, the supposed lover, was brought in for questioning. He admitted to the brief affair but insisted they hadn't spoken in 6 months. He seemed genuinely confused about being dragged into this investigation. The digital trail between them had gone completely cold, just like Carolyn's trail. In the investigators' experience, lovers don't just disappear without a trace. Especially not successful, careful people like Carolyn Durrell. The breakthrough came from Carolyn's co-worker at Northwest Securities. The day before she disappeared, Carolyn had told her something chilling. If anything ever happened to her, there were secrets hidden in her work desk. Important things people would need to know. It was the kind of statement that sends shivers down your spine in hindsight. When investigators opened that drawer, they found a treasure trove of devastating evidence. A draft letter to Bob, never sent, revealing the depth of her despair about their marriage. She wrote about his controlling nature, his obsessive jealousy, how she didn't love him enough to stay married anymore. "I am dying inside," she'd written. "I can't go on pretending there is nothing wrong. The bottom line is, I don't love you enough to stay married." Books about divorce lined the drawer, notes from consultations with multiple lawyers. She'd been planning her escape methodically, quietly saving money for a new life with her 3 children. But she was terrified, and she had every reason to be. Friends and neighbors started coming forward with disturbing stories about Bob's behavior. How he'd show up unexpectedly at Carolyn's lunches with friends, monitoring who she was with. How he'd question her about every penny she spent. How he created an atmosphere of constant surveillance that made Carolyn feel like a prisoner in her own life. One neighbor, Linda Gunderson, said Carolyn always seemed tense when Bob was home, walking on eggshells. But the moment he left for business trips, it was like watching someone finally able to breathe. And then there was the night before she disappeared. Bob had made Carolyn a drink. Unusual behavior for a man who typically expected to be served. When Carolyn called her sister-in-law that evening, she'd seemed tipsy, almost drugged, slurring her words in a way that wasn't normal for her. The sister-in-law found Bob's sudden hospitality deeply suspicious. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. This is where the case takes a turn that would have been impossible just a decade earlier. Because in 1998, we were living in the early days of the digital age. People didn't quite understand yet that nothing on a computer truly disappears. That every search, every deleted file, every click leaves a trail somewhere in the machine's memory. Gordon Mitchell, a computer forensics expert, sat down at Bob Durall's work computer like an archaeologist examining ancient artifacts. What he found would seal Bob's fate and change how prosecutors thought about digital evidence forever. Bob had his own secret digital life that he'd been hiding from everyone. Multiple profiles on Match.com, the dating website. Passionate exchanges with multiple women he'd met online. False promises. His dating profile painted him as separated, unburdened, available, ready to start fresh. All while Carolyn was still very much his wife, still living in their home, still wearing her wedding ring. But that wasn't the most damning discovery. The deleted search history told a story that made investigators' blood run cold. Late-night queries that read like a murderer's instruction manual. Poison, herbs for sedation, methods of suffocation, sleep pills and death. How to smother someone. And then, the search that removed all doubt. The query that made it absolutely clear what Bob had been planning, how to end a spouse's life. Think about what that means. Bob Durall wasn't just fantasizing. He wasn't just angry or frustrated with his marriage. He was actively researching, planning, preparing to eliminate the mother of his 3 children. And he thought that by hitting delete, by clearing his browser history, he could make it all disappear forever. But here's the thing about digital forensics that Bob didn't understand. Deleted doesn't mean gone. Those files were still there, buried in the computer's memory like ghosts refusing to leave the scene of a crime. Every search was a confession. Every query was evidence. Every deleted file was a breadcrumb leading straight to his guilt. Bob had unknowingly created his own digital witness, one that would testify against him with perfect, undeniable clarity. Armed with this devastating digital evidence, investigators got a warrant to search the Durall home more thoroughly. Specifically, they wanted to examine the master bedroom where Bob and Carolyn slept. At first glance, everything looked perfectly normal. The carpet seemed clean. The walls were freshly wiped. The room looked like it had been recently cleaned, which wasn't necessarily suspicious for a tidy household. But forensic investigators don't trust what they see with their naked eyes. They brought in their chemical weapons. They sprayed phenolphthalein, a chemical reagent that reacts with blood by turning bright, unmistakable purple. The bedroom lit up like a crime scene out of a nightmare. Under the seemingly clean carpet, they found what Bob couldn't completely erase: blood. Lots of it. Cut carpet squares had been poorly placed to try and conceal massive pools of blood underneath the bed. He'd used water and detergent, scrubbing desperately in the middle of the night. But amateur cleaning efforts can't fool forensic science. In fact, the cleaned areas actually made the evidence more obvious, like trying to hide a stain by shining a spotlight directly on it. But it was the blood spatter that told the real story of what happened that night. Hundreds of tiny red dots painted the walls, the headboard, even the ceiling. Medium velocity blood spatter. The kind that's consistent with a blunt object swinging through the air repeatedly. Someone had been beaten savagely, brutally in this room. The DNA testing would later confirm what everyone already suspected. Every single drop was Carolyn's blood. Near the floor, investigators found different patterns. Blood that had been coughed up from dying lungs. Evidence of Carolyn's final desperate moments as life left her body. A trail of blood led from the bedroom toward the garage, marking the path Bob had taken to dispose of his wife's body. In his car, they found a receipt for specialty cleaning products purchased the day after Carolyn's disappearance. And here's what made it all so coldly calculated. All 3 children had been conveniently away that night. 2 were at summer camp. 1 was spending the night at a friend's house. Perfect timing for Bob to commit the unthinkable without any witnesses. 41-year-old Bob Durall sat in his jail cell at the Regional Justice Center, waiting for his trial to begin. To police, to prosecutors, to anyone with a badge or authority, he maintained his absolute innocence. He stuck to his story about Carolyn running away. But to someone else, someone he believed was the only one truly listening, he told a completely different story. Guards overheard him in the darkness of his cell, talking to God, asking for forgiveness for what he'd done. In those private moments, when he thought no one was paying attention, when he believed he was alone with his conscience and his maker, the carefully constructed facade crumbled. He confessed to the only witness he believed truly mattered. But that overheard confession to God wouldn't be enough for Carolyn's family. They needed more than spiritual absolution. They needed closure. They needed to bring their daughter, their sister, their friend home. They needed to be able to bury her properly, to have a place to mourn, to say goodbye. The prosecution approached Bob's defense attorneys with an unusual and strategic offer. Lead us to her body, show us where you put Carolyn, and we won't use the fact that you revealed the location against you at trial. We won't tell the jury that you knew exactly where she was all along. The blood loss in the bedroom had been so extensive that prosecutors knew with absolute certainty that Carolyn couldn't have survived her injuries. They didn't actually need her body to prove that ending life had occurred. But for the family's sake, for the children's sake, they wanted to give Carolyn a proper burial and her loved ones some measure of peace. For weeks, Bob wrestled with this impossible decision. Maintaining his innocence meant Carolyn's 3 children would never have closure, would never be able to properly bury their mother, would never have a grave to visit. The weight of this additional cruelty, this final act of control over Carolyn, even in death, finally broke through his self-preservation. In what some saw as a moment of unexpected humanity, and others saw as nothing more than a final manipulation to appear sympathetic, Bob agreed to lead them to her. The caravan of police vehicles, forensic vans, and unmarked cars wound slowly through the Cascade Mountains, about an hour's drive east of Seattle. Bob sat in the back seat of a patrol car, handcuffed, silent for most of the journey. Then he started directing them along increasingly remote, winding forest roads that he'd driven in complete darkness months earlier. His voice was barely audible as he pointed toward the tree line, his hands shaking slightly. At the base of a steep ravine, under a carefully arranged pile of rocks and wrapped in plastic sheeting, they finally found what remained of Carolyn Durrell. The discovery brought no satisfaction to the seasoned investigators standing there. Only a grim confirmation of the brutality Bob had inflicted on the woman who had borne his children. The autopsy would later reveal blunt force trauma to the skull. Multiple devastating blows delivered with such force that her skull had fractured in several places. Blows that had ended a life, destroyed a family, traumatized 3 children, and shattered any possible illusion that Bob had committed anything close to a perfect crime. All those months of internet research, all that careful planning, and late-night searches about poison and sedation. In the end, Bob had abandoned all his careful preparations and done it the most brutal, violent way possible, with rage and a blunt object in their bedroom, while their children were safely away, dreaming of a mother who would never come home. When Bob Durrell's trial finally began in June 2000, nearly 2 years after Carolyn's disappearance, despite having led police directly to his wife's body, despite the overwhelming blood evidence, despite the damning computer searches, he stood before the court and pleaded not guilty. His defense strategy defied all logic and reason. He took the witness stand and, in front of a packed courtroom, spun an elaborate tale about 2 mysterious men. These shadowy figures, he claimed with a straight face, had broken into his house and ended Carolyn's life while he was upstairs. They'd then forced him at gunpoint to dispose of her body, under the threat that if he didn't comply, if he went to the police, they would come back and end not just his life, but his 3 children's lives too. That's why he'd cleaned up all the blood in the bedroom. That's why he'd hidden the body in the mountains. That's why he'd lied to everyone for months. He was simply a terrified father, protecting his kids from dangerous men. The prosecutor stood up for cross-examination, and you could almost see the disbelief etched on her face. She approached the witness stand slowly, deliberately, holding Bob's internet search history in her hands. "Mr. Durrell," she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm, "did these mysterious men also force you to search the internet for ways to end your spouse's life months before your wife disappeared?" Silence filled the courtroom. Did they somehow force you to research poison and sedation techniques? Did they force you to look up information about suffocation and smothering? Bob shifted uncomfortably in his chair. More silence. Did they force you to create multiple dating profiles claiming you were separated? Did they force you to tell women online that you had a plan to resolve your marriage problem? Bob's face went pale. His carefully prepared story, already thin as tissue paper, completely disintegrated under the weight of the evidence. Some of the prosecutors would later admit they'd had a genuinely hard time keeping straight faces during Bob's testimony. After spending 2 full years in jail, this was the best story he could construct? It sounded completely improvised, desperately cobbled together during the trial itself, a last-ditch effort by a man who had finally run out of options. The forensic evidence paraded before the jury over the following days told its own undeniable story. Computer forensics experts took the stand and meticulously explained the deleted search history, walking the jury through each damning query. Blood spatter analysts presented photographs and detailed diagrams explaining exactly what kind of violence had occurred in that bedroom. DNA specialists confirmed beyond any shadow of doubt that the blood found throughout the room was Carolyn's. Each piece of evidence fit perfectly into place, forming an absolutely unbreakable chain of guilt. The jury deliberated for only 2 hours. When they returned to the courtroom, the forewoman stood and announced the guilty verdict for first-degree ending life. Bob's face crumpled as the words hit him. Behind him, Carolyn's family wept. Not from sadness this time, but from profound relief that justice had finally been served. Superior Court Judge Deborah Fleck didn't mince words during sentencing. She called the crime aggravated domestic violence preceded by a pattern of psychological abuse. She noted that despite Bob's education, his professional success, and his standing as a church leader, he was typical, she said, of domestic abusers who systematically control their partners through psychological manipulation and intimidation while maintaining a respectable public image. The standard sentencing range for first-degree ending life in Washington state was 20 to 26 years. But Judge Fleck saw something more calculated, more heinous in Bob's actions that warranted an exceptional sentence. The months and months of planning. The extensive computer research documenting his premeditation. The cold calculation. The absolute and complete lack of genuine remorse. She sentenced him to 46 years and 8 months in prison, 560 months total. She also imposed a permanent no-contact order, making it illegal for Bob to ever contact his 3 children except through their court-appointed guardian and the prosecutor's office. The case sent shockwaves through the legal community. It was one of the first major cases where internet search history played a crucial role in securing a conviction. Prosecutors across the country took notice. The digital age had given them a powerful new tool. But the real victims were Carolyn's 3 children. Her parents, Jim and Lenore Roberts, in their 60s and looking forward to retirement, suddenly found themselves raising 3 grandchildren. During sentencing, Lenore told Bob he was a monster who had disgraced both families. The family filed a wrongful life suit against Bob's estate to support the children. They won, but it was little compensation for what they'd lost. Bob Durall is currently incarcerated at the Monroe Correctional Complex in Monroe, Washington. At 67 years old, he remains behind bars in one of Washington State's largest prison facilities, which houses over 300 inmates. Based on his October 2000 sentencing, Durall's 560-month sentence means he won't be eligible for release until approximately 2046 or 2047, when he would be in his late 80s or early 90s. In Washington state, inmates convicted of first-degree ending life must serve their full sentence. Over the years, Durall has attempted appeals. Court records show he filed a habeas corpus petition in 2007, challenging his conviction and exceptional sentence. He argued the stated reasons for his enhanced sentence weren't valid under law. The Washington Court of Appeals rejected every argument. The appeals court noted that Durall had told women on dating sites he had a plan to resolve his marriage. He'd told one woman, 6 months before Carolyn's disappearance, that it would be easier if his wife were gone. He'd made lists of tasks needed for the crime. These weren't impulsive actions. They were carefully documented steps of someone planning to eliminate his wife. Carolyn's 3 children, young when their mother was taken from them, are now adults in their 30s. The no-contact order remains in effect, preventing Bob from reaching out to them. The Monroe Correctional Complex offers vocational training, GED courses, and college classes. Whether Bob has taken advantage of these programs is unknown. What is certain is that the computer expert who tried to hide his digital footprints now lives where his every movement is monitored, his communication screened, and his freedom completely stripped away. The same control he once inflicted on Carolyn. The Carolyn Durall case represents a turning point in digital evidence. In 1998, The internet was still relatively new. People didn't understand that their online activities left permanent traces. Bob Durall thought deleting his search history made it disappear forever. He was catastrophically wrong. Gordon Mitchell, the computer forensics expert, once said that in the digital age, nothing truly vanishes. Every click, every search, every deleted file leaves a shadow. Bob's months of planning documented in search queries became the prosecution's star witness. But here's what makes this case truly haunting. All that planning didn't even matter. Despite months of researching poison and sedation, Bob ended Carolyn's life in the most brutal way possible, beating her with a blunt object in their bedroom. The blood spatter told a story of rage, not careful execution. So what was all that research for? Was it fantasy? Building courage? Or did something snap that night? We'll probably never know. Bob has never given a full, truthful account. Even his confession to God in his jail cell was overheard, not given willingly. The absurd story about mysterious men at trial showed he was still trying to construct a narrative that would save him. The case also exposed the darker side of seemingly perfect families. From the outside, the Duralls looked ideal. Church-going, professional, successful. But behind closed doors, Bob was systematically controlling Carolyn, monitoring her every move, making her account for every penny. Carolyn knew she was in danger. That's why she told her co-worker about the secrets in her desk. That's why she'd consulted divorce lawyers. That's why she'd started saving money. She was planning her escape. She just ran out of time. Think about that last night, when Bob made her that drink, something he never did. Did she suspect something? We know from her sister-in-law's phone call that Carolyn seemed drugged. Whatever Bob put in that drink likely made her less able to defend herself. After the violence, Bob cleaned. He cut carpet, he scrubbed walls. He bought cleaning products. He wrapped Carolyn's body in plastic and drove it into the Cascade Mountains, where he buried her under rocks. Then he came home, called police, and reported his wife missing. For weeks, he maintained the fiction that she'd run away. He pointed investigators toward Kevin Johnson and the affair. He played the confused, abandoned husband. He even hired a private investigator, all while her body decomposed in the mountains. In the end, Bob Durall's greatest enemy was himself. Every search query, every deleted email, every drop of blood he couldn't clean, all of it testified against him. The digital age leaves no secrets buried. Even ending life leaves a permanent trail. And sometimes, that trail leads straight to justice. Carolyn Durall's case has been featured on Forensic Files and numerous true crime documentaries. It's used in law enforcement training to show how digital forensics can crack seemingly impossible cases. Bob's internet search history has become a textbook example of how criminals create evidence against themselves. But beyond forensics, this is a story about control, fear, and domestic violence. About a woman who tried to escape but couldn't move fast enough. About children who lost their mother to their father's violence. About grandparents raising grandchildren while processing their daughter's loss. It's a reminder that behind closed doors, behind the perfect family facade, there can be darkness. The kind that leads someone to research ending their spouse's life. The kind that allows brutal violence in a bedroom. The kind that makes disposing of a body seem reasonable. As of 2025, Bob Durall has been in prison for nearly 25 years. He has at least 20 more to serve. And Carolyn? She missed it all. She never got to see her children grow up. Never got to meet grandchildren. Never found the freedom she sought. The morning of August 7th, 1998. When Carolyn didn't show up for work, her co-workers knew something was wrong. They were right. Her body was already hidden in the mountains. Her husband was already spinning lies. But what Bob didn't count on was that he'd already confessed. Every search query was a confession. Every deleted file was evidence. In trying to commit the perfect crime, Bob Durall created the perfect case for the prosecution. You can delete your files, but you can't delete the truth. The computer always remembers. The blood always tells the story. That's the real lesson of Carolyn Durall's tragic ending. In the digital age, there are no perfect crimes, only criminals who haven't been caught yet. And thanks to forensic science and detectives who refused to accept Bob's lies, Carolyn's story ended in justice. Bob Durall thought his computer expertise would help him get away with the crime. Instead, it sealed his fate. The files he thought were deleted became the witnesses that convicted him. And that's where this story ends. With a man in his late 60s serving a sentence that will keep him in prison until he takes his very last breath. With 3 children who learned the horrifying truth. With grandparents who gave up retirement. With a family forever shattered. The digital confession is now complete. The blood has told its story. The mountain grave has given up its secret. And Carolyn Durall, 36 years old, mother of 3, woman who just wanted to be free, can finally rest. The case is now closed. Justice has been served. And the lesson remains. In the digital age, your computer remembers everything. Even the things you're desperate to forget, especially those things